Hello, this is Jay Kiefer from the Yellowstone Gateway Museum, and you're watching the conversation series Tell Me a Story. Today we're talking to a person I've wanted to talk to for a long time, Lorraine Bohleen, up at her house on the Shields. How are you, Lorraine?
I'm doing real good.
Well, we always establish your age and your date of birth. I know I'm not supposed to ask a woman's age, but
I'm happy to tell you my age.
Good.
I'm 95. I was born in 1924, and my mother was she was the 16th child in the family, and now I am the last one in that family, the Williamson family, that came from Iowa in the Depression days, and they had their cattle shipped by train, and my grandfather went up to North Dakota first, and he didn't like it very well, so he came to Montana and found a place up at the head of the Shields that they really liked, and so he built a cabin up there. And my grandmother was the first postmistress in Lat, Montana, who was up at the head of the Shields River at Goat Mountain. And my husband, then when we first come, he was in the service.
And your husband's name?
Was Bud Bohleen.
Okay.
And he went to Korea during the war, and I stayed home, raised two children, and helped my parents. They lived up at Wilsall, and my father ranched up there, raised cattle, and then my sister and I had to go to a country school, so we rode horseback to Cottonwood Bench School. And then we'd get off our horses, feed them grain, and then go into the one-room schoolhouse up there with the teacher. And she was having all grades, first grade to the 8th grade. And I always remembered her name. She was Mrs. Greenwood, and I didn't like her very well. But as kids, we'd always have a real good time out playing baseball, school baseball. And all the games that you used to do, jump rope and hide and seek and the whole works in those days. And now when the kids come, my grandkids come here to visit, they want to just sit in the house and watch TV. But I found an answer to that problem. I would go shut off the breakers box, and they had to go outside because they said, "What's wrong with the TV?" And I said, "I darn if I know what's wrong with it." But anyway, so I got them trained to go out, and we planted some fish in this is a dare creek right out here. And so I taught them how to go out and fish and play outside instead of sitting in the house and watching TV. So that's part of the things that we did. And my husband and I, when he got home from the service, we raised cattle. We had cow-calf operation, and we would take turns at night going out checking the cows. And if I would lay here and sleep on the floor for 2 hours, and it was my turn then to go to the barn and check to see if anything was calving, and then it was his turn to go to the barn and check, for calving. And so we did that from I think it was it was in the 70s, 60s and 70s we did that. And then later on, we decided that was too much work. So we sold the cow-calf operation and went into yearlings, and we run yearlings. And we did that then for the rest of while we lived here. But anyway, we've been on this ranch 75 years, and we used to have a lot of antelope, so we'd let hunters come out and hunt, and we'd have people come from Michigan and New Jersey and stay with us and hunt. And you can see on my walls, I got a few trophies. And so now instead of going hunting, I take pictures. I love to get out. In fact, day before yesterday, we went up Tom Miner Basin and watched a grizzly bear. And he was busy all the time we were there. The biggest bear I'd ever seen. I shot that bear up there on the wall. He come through here one day and he was spooking our horses. And finally, some friends had just come in and had their out-of-state license from Michigan. And he says, I got a bear license if you want him. And so I said, well, let's go for it. So that's what we did. And so anyway, that's this. You know, I've been busy all my life doing things I love to do. And so on August the 19th, I just went to Roosevelt Lodge and took a trail ride. And got on a horse. I wish I had my own saddle on that horse, but I didn't. But anyway, we rode to the cookout where they were serving steaks and stuff with my horse. And we put our horses, there was about 15 of us in the group, and we put our horses in a corral while we ate. And lo and behold, here come a buffalo on a fight, and he was trying to get in with our horses. And so anyway, the wranglers, 5 of them, finally got him out to the top of the mountain where he belonged, you know, chased him out of there. But it was a little exciting for a while. So, but anyway, after we was there, Ricky Stanky, he said, I want to introduce you to this lady. She's 95 years old. And I didn't want anybody to know because I thought they wouldn't let me go on the ride, you know, if they knew how old I was. But anyway, I said, as long as you keep my cinch tight on this horse, I'll be okay. So anyway, after a bit, he said, well, I got a lady here that's 95. And we said, uh-oh, boy, you know, now everybody's going to know how old I am. So he started singing, back in the saddle again, back in the saddle again. So anyway, the secret was out. They finally all sang happy birthday to me, which was great. So that's that story.
So, what made your family come out to Montana?
Well,
do they have to have some? Do they know anybody? Do they know what the land looked like?
they had to live. I think it was 5 years on the land, and then they could own the land.
So they homesteaded.
Homesteaded.
Okay.
Yes. And so after that, why? Everybody kind of went their separate ways, and some of our family moved to California because they thought they could get rich if they went to California. So that's what they did. A lot of them did that, you know. But we have been here and enjoyed every single year that we've been here. First, we started after he got out of the service. We were collecting cars, restoring cars, and that didn't go too well because they were a little more expensive to restore. So then we went to tractors, and we had the whole series of international tractors, 15 of them. And he got them all running, and I painted them. I painted all 15 tractors. And I now have hung my paintbrush up, and I'm not painting any more tractors. I'm just doing photography. I like to go out and take pictures, so that's the story of one day.
Well, I talked to Lois when she came to the museum, and she said you get on your 4-wheeler every morning and pick up the mail.
Yeah, yes. You know what?
There's probably a lot more you do that she didn't want to talk about.
Well, my horse died of a heart attack, and so I finally went to a 4-wheeler because I didn't have to saddle it. All I had to do is turn the key, and I'm ready to go.
And put gas in.
So, and I can still do that. But right now I have it stored for the winter. So I just, I don't think I can go out and get it out of there without somebody seeing me.
Well, let's step back on there. What did you tell me about who your grandparents were?
Well, my grandparents were Matilda and and Williamson. And then Martha Adams and Sim Adams from Clyde Park was on my dad's side. And they came from Kentucky to Clyde Park. And my dad and mother got on the train. They were dating, and they finally got on the train, went to Livingston and got married, and then came back to Clyde Park. And my dad was a chef. He was cooking at, they were doing the highway between Clyde Park and Livingston. And my mother was doing laundry, and he was doing cooking.
Who was he cooking for?
The rest,
road crew? Or
the group was working on the highway.
Okay.
And my mother was doing the laundry for all the workers on the Highway 89 going north.
So like, about what year would that have been? Do you have any idea?
It would have been in 1924,
Well, I think
25, 26.
we have a history major wrote his thesis on the Yellowstone or convict grave, and that was in 1923.
23.
There, so
Well, this was around 26 and 27, I think, when they got the railroad north to Clyde Park and the highway. They were building the highway.
well, going back to your grandparents, did they say what? Did your mother or father ever say what brought them out this way?
Well, I think it was just they wanted some land of their own, you know, and that's why they came back here into Montana from Iowa to get, you know, land of their own and work, and they always had a big garden because they had so many kids that they didn't have to hoe. They could put each kid with a hoe.
Well, can you describe the personalities of your grandparents? Well, how would you describe them, and where did they, what was their house or like?
Well, my grandparents in Clyde Park, he was the janitor at the Clyde Park High School, my grandfather, Mr. Adams, Sim Adams. And he always had to ring the bell for the school for kids to get to school, you know. But if he saw somebody that was late, he wouldn't ring the bell till the kid got into the schoolyard because he didn't want the kids to be late. So he wouldn't ring the bell and have them absent. So they was always present to school, Clyde Park. And he raised bees, he had honeybees, and he had chickens, and he had everything there was, you know, and he'd go up Bracket Creek to Terry's sawmill and get winning edges, he called it, and that was his firewood for the winter. He had wood stoves and kitchen stove and a big old heater in the front room, wood stoves, and so all of his family got jobs herding sheep for Harvard's sheep company, and they herded sheep that was their jobs. I mean, they just went around and worked, you know, was not in a store or anything like that. They just worked for ranchers and farmers and different people like that.
Well, do you remember your grandmother's cooking at all, as far as any dishes that they would make?
My grandfather done the cooking.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, when he called for us kids in the morning, the hotcakes are on, you better be there, because the old wooden cook stove, he had them all out there on the top, and we had to be there or else we were, well, go hungry. So, anyway, but my grandmother didn't cook much.
Okay, so it was like at high noon, there was dinner.
Yes.
There, and then like 7:30, 8 o'clock breakfast, and then
Right.
everything was at a set schedule.
Yes. Yeah. And during the winter, when it was so bad, stormy, my sister and I were planted at, she was at her grandmother's in Wilsow because of the storms, and we couldn't ride horseback then. And I was staying in Clyde Park with my grandparents. We had two sets. And then after about a month or two, then we'd get back riding our horses and going to Cottonwood School. And then after that, my folks bought a place on the river, and then we got to ride the school bus to Wilsow to school. So we thought that was pretty expensive to be able to get off of a horse and get in the school bus and ride to school. So that was where we ended up.
Well, did your mother and father ever talk about how they met?
Yes, they met at a dance on a schoolhouse up at Myersburg or Sudan, one or the other, and then they fell in love at the first thing. And I think they only went together for about 2 months or maybe a month, and then they got on the train and went to Livingston and got married, and then come back and went to work. And then my father died of a heart attack, and so my mother was left with us 2 little girls, and she got smallpox. So then my grandparents had to take us girls because they were quarantined. In those days, they quarantined them, you know, for smallpox. And so then after my mother was well, then she was going out and working for different farmers and ranchers, cooking for them. And she met this guy that was a farmer, and she was cooking for him, and the neighbor lady said, well, why don't you marry him? You know, go ahead and marry him, and said, then you can raise your kids together, because he had 2 kids. His wife had died, and she got lead poisoning from painting a house, and so anyway, that took place, and then we were all raised together. I mean, just like his kids, her kids, and my kids, and that was how we were raised together, and we got along, and we had a good family life. You know, that was just the top thing that I remember, that we were always just buddies, you know, to each other, and then after that, why they went. My mother went to. She went to school at all the little schools. I think she went to. I don't think she graduated. I remember she was, because country schools, you would go to the 8th grade, and then most kids went to work to help raise, you know, help with getting the jobs done at home.
I had a conversation with the individual, Rosetta Ricky.
Yes, I know.
So I think she's one of the older Avon sales reps in Park County.
Oh.
And she went to a country school in Sweetgrass County. And she had to pass the 8th grade exam and have a certain percentile on there, or else she could not enter the Sweetgrass County High School, because they felt that if you attended a country school, you got a inferior education. Well, she said that she passed with flying colors, and at the end of when she graduated from high school in Sweetgrass County, they offered her the position to teach. And she said, I know what school I'd be assigned, to that one-room schoolhouse with that metal shield on there that gets so hot. And I didn't want to burn myself, so I said, no, thank you.
I suppose, yes. I know my husband told a lot of stories, because winters were bad. I mean, I remember when we were living up north of Wilsall that it got 50 below, and us kids had the measles. And we could hear that old house crack. It was so cold that the house would crack. And my husband said that they were sleeping in a bunkhouse, and it got so cold that they put the mattress on top of them instead of sleeping on it. They had to be warm, so they just put the mattress on top of them, and that's how they stayed warm in this bunkhouse. And so nowadays, when we talk about these things happening, it's Greek to the kids. They don't understand how the people survived at that time, you know, with the difficulties that they had. And you had to go out and milk the cows and feed the pigs and feed the chickens. And I remember that those kids had 2 sets of clothes. One was for school and one was for work at home. As soon as we got home from school, we had to change into our work clothes and go out and haul wood, be sure there was a lot of wood in for the kitchen stove and the heating stove. And I can remember that Nowadays, I got so many clothes I don't even have room in the closet for. So it's a little different story. Yeah. So anyway, it's good to visit with you guys, and I'm happy to reminisce. That's what's great, is to think
Right.
back.
Well,
Hi,
you-
Jay. Hi.
hello,
hi.
Lois.
As she
We're joined
told
at
you.
we're joined
Yes.
we're
Oh,
joined
yeah.
at the table with Lorraine's daughter, Lois Olmsted.
Yes.
And for those of you watching on YouTube or Facebook, Lois's video will be being currently edited now, but she joined us on there, so this you'll have a twofer, mother
Yes.
and daughter.
Yeah, right.
Welcome to tell me a
Yeah,
story.
good to see you. I was just hoping that she told you some of the great stories that are. When you were talking about the school, you've got to tell them about leaving your sister at the school when they rode those horses.
Oh yes, I think they asked one time, "What did you ever get in trouble at school?" And I thought, yeah, I did, because I went home. I got kind of mad and upset with my sister, so I left her at school and I rode home. And when I got home, my father was in the barn and he said, "Where's your sister?" And I said, "I left the little brat at school." Oh, and I remember that's the hardest whipping I ever got. He said, "Get on the horse and go back and get her," which I did, and I've never forgotten.
I knew they should tell some of those little sneaky stories.
Yeah.
And the other one that I just when Dad came home from the service, didn't he get off the train or he
At
got at Bozeman?
There was a rodeo on in Bozeman, and he got off the train there. And so when I seen him, I mean, when he left, he was skinny, but boy, when he got off that train, I thought, "Is that him?" And then when he smiled, I knew it was him. And so he said, "Have you got my Levi's?" He said, "I'm ready to get in those Levi's." And he said, "Get out here and do the rodeo one." And he did. He rode saddle broncs and bulls during his, till he thought when we had this family of kids, 2 kids is all we had. But anyway, he said he thought that was too dangerous a thing to be doing, this rodeo and trying to raise kids. But he enjoyed every bit of it, and liked it. And so then it passed down to our son, and he was a roper, and so he was at all the rodeos. We'd always go to church on Sunday and then head out with the horse trailer and the horses and go to a rodeo. No matter where it was, we went to the rodeos. So, and
this is before there was any money. It was just
Oh.
the sheer competition.
yeah, no money. Yeah, right. Yeah, we would go over to, I think it was at Melville one time, and I remember when he got home that Levi's were $4.99.
Wish I could find $4.99.
That's what we said too.
As a matter of fact, where we're sitting right here, right now, this was the arena. And are you at the catch pin or the? Let's see.
No,
this
this is the catch pin, and down there was the chute.
Yeah. So I live where the chutes were, and she lives where the catch pin
Catch pin
was
was.
when we decided to
roping.
live closer together. Yes.
Yeah.
But she cooked so many, the brandings and the things
yes.
that they had. She'd be out doing the ear tags or whatever part of it, and then at the same time have dinner cooking for
About 20
people.
branding, doing all the branding, and a lot of times I was on a baler. I was either running a piece of equipment. In fact, one time my husband says, "I'm going to teach you to weld." He said, "Because when you break down, there's no use of calling me. You come in here and weld whatever you broke down." And so I did. I know how to weld now, because when something would break, I just fix it and then go back out on the baler or whatever it was, And one time I was out on the baler, and Bill Dunn come by, and he said, "Lorraine, I stopped up at your house," and he said, "I think you better go back up there." He said, "There's something going wrong in your house." Well, that pressure cooker had a little knob on it, and it blew off, and the beans was sticking up on my ceiling. That's what was. I thought, yes, I better go to work. So anyway, lots of different stories, but what a
in
life.
that house that we lived in over our original house that I grew up in, we had to run the water all the time.
Yeah, it was a spring, and you never shut the water. It came from a spring up the creek about I suppose about 500 feet, the water would come but we couldn't shut it off in the kitchen because it just went on down to the basement and then out to the creek.
So one day she had some meat thawing in the sink, and in the process, the meat kind of slid over the drain of the sink, and she was out in the field working. She came back in, and here was the water all in the kitchen, and my mom, being my mom, the mechanical one, she sized up the situation, and she knew that the kitchen tipped a bit, that the houses weren't all level, tipped a bit. So she went and got her bit and her drill thing, whatever you call it, and drilled a hole in the floor over by the stove and let all the water run. And we wonder if the people that bought that house, if the hole is still.
Yeah, I'd like to go back up there and see if that hole's still there, that I drilled that hole in there. Well, I couldn't mop all day. I had other work to do. I couldn't do that, so I thought that'll solve that problem. So
There were no drybacks.
No. Yeah. She can always get out of a pickle. She's known as she said, with all of the bear and the elk and all that she shot, and moose and everything. They got a problem underneath this house. They had some muskrats come.
no,
Not muskrats.
no.
Woodchucks.
Woodchucks.
Woodchucks. I never get the story right exactly, but an animal, small
Yeah,
animal.
woodchuck.
A woodchuck got under this house and was chewing on the wiring, so they had a trapper that we know come and see if he could trap him, and I guess he got one or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, tell him a couple days later, my dad always said, well, if he saw any game, he'd let her shoot first, because he knew she was a better shot than he was, and so she looked out this dining room window up toward the cabin.
Yeah, there was a woodchuck right up there at that cabin. And so I just went in the kitchen and rolled down the window and got my .243 and looked up there, and I thought, I think I could hit that, which I did. I shot him. But the next day I couldn't hear because I shot and my ears was ringing.
She said she never shot in the house before.
No. So it took a few days, to remember to go outside, Mrs. B. Don't go shooting when you're in the inside. So anyway, but that was one of the things.
This happened inside the interior of the house?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
right there. She stood at that
But
window
not outside.
and shot
No,
up to that cabin.
Oh.
No, I shot right up there.
Yeah, to the cabin.
But anyway, we finally got all the woodchucks because that's what was under the house and chewing the wiring. So then we had to have an electrician come and inspect our wiring to make sure that it wouldn't burn down our house, But another problem I got into, and which is really stupid, but out of our well, we didn't have too good a well, and so we would pour a gallon of Purex down the well to purify the water. And so I did that. She was gone, and she was always telling me, now be careful while I'm gone. And so I thought, well, I'll dump that soap down there. Or I mean, not soap, Purex. And it was soap. And I had bubbles from every place in this house. I turned the faucets on, and there was bubbles coming out in the yard. There was bubbles, and there was bubbles here. And so, I thought, well, what in the world's wrong? Well, then that fine print down there on the bottom of that Purex said it was soap.
Purex detergent. Divorce got a
Lawrence Welk didn't have anything on you.
They started calling her Mrs.
Mrs.
Bubbles.
Mrs. Bubbles, yes. Oh, yeah.
But when I travel and I come home, she'll say to me, well, I might as well tell you flat out. And when she says that, then I really get worried.
She's alert when I say flat out. She means, what did you do?
And she had called me while I was gone and wanted to know where the key to my house was. And I thought, well, she must be putting my mail in there or something. Well, when I got home and she said, well, I might as well tell you flat out, I put soap down the well, so it was 6 weeks before she could drink out of the thing because there was soap everywhere in the water heater. So anyway, she'd taken a shower to get ready to go to church and she couldn't get the soap out of her hair. So she had to go to my house and get a bucket of water to put her head in.
Rinse my head. Yeah.
The other time that she says flat out is that I pulled in and we had some gophers, and I bought a BB gun back she couldn't hit anything. So I said, I wish you'd just see if you could get those gophers, you know, and so she said she would, and so we pulled into my driveway, and she says, I might as well tell you flat out. She said, I shot your fence. I have white vinyl fence, and here's these holes at the bottom of it. She said, tried to paint them.
And I was going to cover it up, but the paint wouldn't stick on that vinyl, you know, so I had to just say, well, I did it, so.
So then I said, well, Ross just told me, he was teaching me how to run the snow blower because my husband passed away on April 28th in 2016, and my dad went to heaven in, let's see, May 26th. That same, just a few weeks
just 2
later,
weeks
and so
apart.
that's why we find ourselves here. We both live close enough we can yell if we need to, but people say, do you live together? And we say, we're two independent Montana women and we don't want to live together. But anyway, Ross had come out to show me how to run the snow blower. No, the weed eater.
Weed eater.
It was the weed eater. And so I was working right along that same fence that she shot. I took all the bottom pickups out of it with the weed eater. So we have had adventures. I mean, not even back in the days when she did, but she was here in 1949. My grandpa lived about a mile over here. They bought the ranch from my grandpa. And of the 49 flood, you've probably heard of when the Shields River
Oh, yes.
flooded so bad.
Uh-huh. That was when Terry lost all the sheep up at Clyde Park. You know, the water got so high it took all of his sheep and they washed down. And then my husband had a flatbed trailer and there was granaries over at his father's place and they all went down the river. It washed all of them out and they were trying to save the chickens and they put them in gunny sacks, and I think Nicholson was the sheriff.
Albert Nicholson.
Yeah, and he come out to help. Anyway, he stepped to go into the chicken house, and anyway, there was a well there, and he fell down in the well. Anyway, they threw a rope across, and one on the side of the chicken house, and the other on the house side. They started to pull it across the flood, and the rope broke or whatever, and the chickens all went down the river anyway because it was in the gunny sacks, and they couldn't catch him. I mean, the lariat, you know, just broke, and the way they went. So anyway, you know, another thing, my sister-in-law and I walked down to the river, the river bridge right down here, and just look at the flood and see how things was going, and so we walked back across the bridge, and I don't think we got as far as from here to that wall out there, where our mailbox is, and crashed, and the bridge fell in. The bridge washed away, and we were just on it. We heard that crash and looked around, and it was gone, and that's all there was to it. And just by the grace of God, we was not on the bridge.
Divine intervention.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, now you mentioned your sister, but you didn't give her name.
Helen.
Helen.
Oh,
Okay.
that was Dad's sister, but her
Yeah.
sister on the horse was Alice Moore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alice Moore. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And then with his kids, her kids, and our kids, how do you say it? Grandma and William Adams had Mom and Alice. And then Grandpa Tony had Bernard and Bernice Linneman. And then together they had Frank Linneman and then Doris Bailey. So that was the kids that were in Mom's family.
Well, I knew Doris Bailey because she had the P.O. liquor store for a while.
The restaurant, it was the restaurant, and then somebody had
Yes, it will sell.
Wilsall. And
Yes.
was her husband in construction?
No, yes, he was. Kenneth Bailey.
Yeah, Ken.
Ken Bailey.
Right.
Yes, right. Well, one of the things that was exciting, then the parents had to come over and stay with us because the water had washed everything down, but it was Bud's birthday, and his sister Helen had made him a birthday cake. And so she was going to bring it over to my house, and she set it on the washing machine in the porch over here. And she went to get it, and the cat had walked through with the cake. So there was cat tracks through the cake. She just took a stove and she just rushed it off like that. Didn't say anything to anybody until she just brought the cake over, and we all had birthday cake, but just wiped the cat tracks out, and that was it. You know, don't pay any attention, but just eat the cake. So
The flood was, Dad's birthday was June 5th, so it would have been June 5th, 1949, you know, and that was a big thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then the other thing was the winter, you know, was so bad. Well, first of all, to go back to the flood, my brother and I, Ronnie and I, went to Grannis School right down here. So there was no bridge, and you'd have to go up to Chadburn and around. So Russ Polson lived up a mile up the road, and Mom would take us down there, and he'd get on his horse and take us across the river, you know, after it went down. And then we'd walk over to the school and then come back, and then he'd get the horse, and then Mom would take us the rest of the way. So there was a lot of things from that flood, you know, that really, that affected the Shields Valley for quite a while.
right.
But then also was the winter, because I remember them, you drove us in that little yellow Jeep over the top of the fences, because
Yes, the snow was deep. Then the snow melted and April came, when we'd go out the fields and pick up our change we'd lost going over the hilltops on that little Jeep. We'd lose some change, and we'd just go out and find them in the spring.
Sort of they popped up like new flowers, huh?
I guess so.
So that was in that snow that, I mean, when you're calving and stuff, and they were doing it all together, you know, and it's 20 below or 25 below and getting up in the middle of the night and all of that's when they decided in probably 98 or something, when you sold the cow-calf
Yeah.
card.
Right, yeah.
And then they came to this ranch in 1944, 45. We moved
45.
here after Dad was out of the service, and he got out in 44.
Mm-hmm.
And I started Grannis, I would have been 6, so it would have been 45, 46 that they moved here to the house up the creek. And then they built this house in 85.
Yeah.
But they've been here on this ranch 75 years.
And now we are pasturing mules. I still have the pasture, and so we have a neighbor that has mules, and he takes them to parades and stuff and takes people on their honeymoons and stuff with the mules. And so we're pasturing them.
A honeymoon was a mule?
Over just on their way from the way.
I was just gonna say, this
Yeah.
doesn't really sound very romantic.
Yeah.
They did a lot of trail rides, because when you say that, they took, like, she went through the park on a horse for her 65th birthday.
Yeah.
How far was that trail
Well,
ride?
we started in Cody, and then we were gone horseback, we were gone 7 days with a friend of mine that was an outfitter, and he wanted to check trails in the park, so when he took customers, that he had a wrangler that would take a saw and saw down trees and stuff to clear the trails, so that he invited him and his wife invited me along, and so we went from Cody to Old Faithful, and on a trail ride, and I can remember that on the pack horse they had the pantlers, what do you call them? And anyway, they had an ice cream freezer, and after we got from Cody back into our first camp, they went out to the snowbank and got some snow in the ice cream freezer, and we had ice cream, homemade ice cream, before we got back and got our tent up for the night. And we crossed the headwaters of the Yellowstone, and we crossed the headwaters of the Snake River on that trip. And then another trip, we went to West Yellowstone and went through the same couple, and we went through the thoroughfare, it's called up there in the park, and we rode through there, and that's where I got my first ride on a mule. You had to get on a stump to get on the mule, and you talk about a stubborn mule. We went over a little footbridge going into this camp, and when we come back, why, Gary said, let's go around that bridge. It don't look too safe to go over. Do you think down at the end of the ripples? And then we'd catch the fish as they come down, and that's how we fished.
But they also ice skated and all that stuff on that. And then when he taught you when he had you on the wagon and trying to.
Oh yeah, we were feeding loose hay on a hay rack, and he would take me with him. And so one time we were way out in a field, and the geese was flying over. And so he just handed me the reins, and he said, here, hold this team. And he shot up in the air to get the geese, and then the horses ran away. Because I was probably just 10 years old, you know, and I wasn't able to hold those reins and keep the horse. But anyway, we got stopped, you know.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And he taught you how to
How
shot
did you get
bait.
stopped when it was a runaway?
Well, he took the reins there.
Okay,
Because,
Okay.
I mean, after he shot it, spooked the horses.
Okay.
And I don't think he even got a goose
okay.
or duck or whatever he was shooting at. But anyway, I couldn't hold him and I was crying because I said I couldn't stop him. At 10 years old, you know. But then he got him stopped and we went on and fed the cattle, the hay from the hay rack. So, lots of experiences. And kids, when I start telling them these stories, they don't savvy. But if I want my stereo over here fixed or something, I ask them to do it, they can do it. Even if they're 3 years old, they can go over there and fix that, and I can't fix it.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, so life goes on, you know. Live a good life, wonderful life, you know, so I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, when you were at Cottonwood School,
Yes.
who were the kids that you would go to school with?
Well, the Hargis kids, and then there was the lovely kids, all of
Wendell, Candy.
Wendell, Kenny, and Orvis. Yeah, they went. And then there was one family had so many kids. They had 5 kids by the name of Carol, and they would bring those kids to school in a buggy. They didn't have enough horses for 5 kids to ride, you know. So they'd bring those kids up to Cottonwood School in a buggy. Bill Carroll's children was the ones that was in the buggy.
And you know where Bill Carroll lived, or
Well,
the relationship?
he lived close to where Cliffy Miller lived up there.
Okay.
And then there was Sassy's,
Buck. I
yeah.
know you, Buck.
Buck Sassy and Herman Sassy, and all those lived right across the road from the school. And let's see what other. Oh, there was one of the not Bridgman, but anyway, there was one girl that was that had adopted her, and she her father would always bring her to school.
I think there was a Russell Bridgman that lived up
Yeah, there
the
was.
Shields.
Yeah,
He had a
but
daughter.
they didn't go to school up there.
No.
It was Darlene. What was her first name? Anyway, it's a senior moment.
Yeah.
At 95, you
But
can have a
you
couple.
can have I have it at 69. Senior moment.
I do at 77. Well, now we've all told our ages.
Now you know our age.
Right. Oh yes. Well, I don't mind. I don't mind it. You know.
She has always said that she never thinks about her age. She
Well-
never thinks about her
Well,
age.
so for people are going to be watching this 50, hopefully 100 years from now. But what kind of age groups were in the classes were in the Cottonwood School? Was it
It was all classes,
1 through 6 or
1 through 8.
1 through 8?
Yes. And then they would have dances in the schoolhouse, sometimes on the Saturday night, and they'd bring potluck, you know, and they'd dance, and then they'd stop the dance for a while, and they'd all eat, and then there'd be kids sleeping on the benches and everywhere there, you know. And one time we were, the dance was over, and we got on a sled, a team of horses with a sled with Mr. Lovely driving it, and the storm was so bad that we got lost. And so he just said, well, I'll just let the horses go. They'll find their way. And they did. They found the barn. Otherwise, because it was pitch dark, and then we were sitting under blankets, and they had bricks for heat, you know, to warm up a brick and take it with you to keep your feet warm, you know, and cover up with buffalo robes and whatever, and away you go. So, but I'm sure that they remember the same story because we didn't know if we was going to ever get home or not.
And we always talk about how you had so much more time then.
Oh yeah.
And we went fishing or on picnics. They used to go up to Les Gilbert's. This was when my dad lived, my grandpa over right on the river, and Helen and Lillian, and they'd go 7 miles up to the top of Sheep Mountain, and they would play music and maybe stay till midnight or so, and then come back. You imagine the cars and the transportation then, but then after they had us, and we would go on picnics up Brackett Creek. They'd go fishing. Family gatherings all the time.
Had lots of time. Those days we were even milking cows, and then we'd take off and just take our fishing poles and head up for Brackett Creek, go up to campgrounds and then come back. But nowadays, I don't know where time goes, but it's not like it used to be. I think we better change our clocks back to what it used to be instead.
My dad would always say, we got to get, and there was always work to be done.
Oh, always.
And he'd always say, I got to get, and I'd say to him, wherever we get in the car, we got to get, we got to get there so we can get back. We got to get, and we get to town. He said, we got to get, and so when he passed away, and they asked, did we want a Bible verse or something on his tombstone, and I said, I told him we were going to put gotta get, and so that's what it says.
So if you go out to the cemetery, you'll find his headstone because it says, I gotta get to getting.
But they worked so hard to, to keep the ranch. Cattle prices weren't always good, and they had always other things, like she talked about. They restored and bought and sold T-Birds for a while, Thunderbird cars.
Yeah.
And then they went to the tractors, and they restored all of those different tractors. But they also, I can remember my dad going down when there were 3 lumber yards in Livingston, Birkeland's and Downer Lumber Company, and I don't remember what the third, in Carroll's. Anyway, Dad would go down and buy, it was called 2x4 rejects. They weren't good enough to be sold for lumber commercially. So he would buy those bundles and probably put, do you think there were like 10 on the back of his truck, his stock truck, but just the bed. And then he'd take off in the morning and just go toward Billings, turning in maybe Melville or wherever, and going to the ranches and selling those bundles of 2x4s out. And then if he got clear to Billings and he hadn't sold them all, then Bender's auction market would buy what he had, and then they'd sell them for them. And then they had sheep for a while. They had a dairy for 28 cows.
Along with Fred Schellenberg and Bob and Bill Anderson, where I run the dairy. You could take your cans of milk into the
Livingston, Yellowstone.
Road right down there by the swimming pool. You know where that was, right there across from the plumbers. Yeah.
And they'd sell they had to take the
So,
milk every day.
so it was in a South Second
Yes.
on there?
Yeah.
But they did those dairies, and then they'd have hired men back in those days. Kids would come, and they would live in like the bunkhouse part of our house over there, and she would cook for them and be working in the field, and then they might be doing stacking the hay or whatever. And I remember when my dad invented, because balers are the old time baler, and Dad invented, he put 2, you have to help me with the lumber stuff,
8x8 boards wide, 8x8,
and hooked it to the baler so that when the bale would come out, then they would stack them on this slide, he called it. And then when he got 6 or 8 bales, he'd put a crowbar down, they'd slide off, and then they'd do it again. Anything to make the work easier, so they could get more done. So then the baling and the dairy and then pigs for a while. They raised hogs for butchering. All things to make the ranch pay.
But he done custom combining.
Oh yeah, and custom combining.
And I would have to flag him. One time I flagged him bringing the combine home from Great Falls. I flagged him all the way to here to the ranch. And then another time he was up to Mill Creek combining for somebody, and I was driving the grain truck. At that time, the highway Bozeman Hill was being changed to one, instead of all
to the interstate.
The interstate was there. And I had a truck, in fact, I had a girl helping me one time, and she says, "What do you mean, put it in compound gear?" And I said, "Well, if you're going to haul grain and you got a truck, you got some more gears, And I said, so I put it in compound gear, and I looked behind my beer, and I must have had about 20 cars behind me, and finally I thought, I'm going to get over and pull over so he can go on by me. But this guy that that he was combining for wanted me to take the grain to Manhattan. That was the only
From
elevator.
Mill Creek, Manhattan.
Manhattan was the only granary that they would take the grain. So I'd drive that over there, unload the grain, come back, and then the next morning get another load of grain from clear up there, almost to Emma Grant, and drive that truck over to dump the grain. So
And then she says it's been a really good life.
Yep.
Doing all those things.
yeah, I still wish I could get out and do those kind of things, but now I can have more fun with my lawnmower and my four-wheeler. You know, we can race once in a while. I told her I gotta teach her how to slow down. She was going too fast with her lawnmower, and I'd say, pull that gear back, you know, it'll go slower.
We have an invisible line between our two houses, and she mows her half and I mow my half. Because we both want to do it.
So,
Who does a better job of
Oh,
mowing?
she does.
I don't know for
I
sure.
thought that one.
Hands down. Yes.
But luckily, she had three boys she raised, and so one works at the hospital in Livingston, one works for Napa in Livingston, and one's for Colstrip, working in Colstrip. So the youngest one here at Napa, we have a honeydew list for him. And last night I was sitting here and I didn't even know it. He put all of my outdoor picnic tables and chairs, he'd put them all away for the winter. So we just give him a lot of praise, and he listens to us sometimes.
It's good to have family help.
Yeah,
you know.
right.
And they did that all along, you know, her brothers and sisters and my dad's brothers and sisters, the families. It was such a big thing of helping one another.
Yeah.
And there was never Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, all of those holidays. There'd be 30 of us or so together and all back in the days when there was more time, I guess. So their family was very close.
We had the opportunity of Lois shared her Bohleen scrapbook,
Oh, yeah.
and I guess it was Thanksgiving. And when I looked at all the people around the table, you would swear that there would have been 2 or 3 leaps on the table, and it was like a family reunion. She said, "No, that was just Thanksgiving when we all got together." I thought, "Whoa."
Yeah, we used to do that, yeah. But one Christmas, the tree was sitting right over there, and that blanket, my husband and I sit wrapped in it because it was 25 below, and we couldn't go anyplace, so we had to spend Christmas alone. So we made artificial turkey, and that we used a chicken instead of a turkey. And we had, a cocktail, and it was made out of cherries instead of cocktails. And we had our own private little Christmas party. No company, because we couldn't get out and they couldn't get in.
Yeah.
So we just enjoyed Christmas alone. But I can remember the thermometer set right, I got a picture of it, it was sitting right out there on that there light pole, and it was 25 below.
I think that was the only Christmas probably in their, they were married 74 years that they were alone. So it was always family, you know, you'd make a way to go like to my Uncle Roger's clear up 12 miles out of Wilsall, or
Well, I
they
was
wanted to be
sitting right there in
together.
that chair right there, and I seen something go by, and the bear was walking right across my deck, and he went out there and got on that picnic table. And then another time we had a wolf. A wolf came right up this creek, and you know, when you take that there, what do you call it? They're riding that chuck wagon up there in the park. They tell you that the wolves all stay in the park, you know, and they don't get out of the park. They just stay there. Well, I've got news for them. They do come out, and they get into our animals and they kill them. And so anyway, that wolf come out and he went up that direction. My husband jumped in the pickup to go see where he was going, and I just stood here like dum-dum. You know, I was wishing I'd taken a picture of him, and I didn't. I was so shocked to see a wolf going out here, but anyway, they don't stay in the park. They do come out into the ranches and kill cattle and sheep and such.
So you've always been a photographer. What was the first camera you ever had?
It was a box camera, just box camera, and it just took black and white pictures. And so That was my first camera. And I think that we had one that, I remember there was one that you could develop them with. I don't know what that camera was. Do you remember there was?
Instamatic.
Instamatic.
Instamatic, is that what?
Polaroids.
Yeah,
You know,
Polaroid.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Sometimes I ask her what if she didn't have the life she had, the job, or what would she have liked to have done, and she said that she sold advertising. Didn't you say for the annual
Shields, yeah, the Shields
in high school?
I would go around and get the advertising from different businesses in Livingston, Pride Park, and then go back and do them at school in that school paper.
Some photography.
Well, when you were growing up there, did you, besides working on your father's ranch there, did you have any other jobs?
Yeah, I tied flies at Dan Bailey's.
Tell me about that.
Well, I just know how to make real good. I tied Joe's hoppers and well, let's see. There was about 8 ladies. I know that's when the president got shot. And we were just going into the Murray to have a cup of coffee.
We're talking about 1963.
Yeah,
When John Kennedy was
yeah,
assassinated.
right. So I did do that because anything we could do to make $1, why we'd try to do that. I mean, it was tough going for a few years that you just didn't have anything to. But we always had a garden. I mean, a big garden, and we always had chicken. And every Sunday was fried chicken and homemade ice cream. And then the relatives from town would come out because they always wanted to have my mother's cooking fried chicken and my dad's homemade ice cream. So it was a good life.
So how many years did you tie flies for Dan Bailey?
Oh, just 1 year, I
1
think
year.
it was, yeah.
That was her only
Because
job.
every time I would look out the window while my husband would be coming to town, I thought, I'm in here to make some money, and here he comes in town to eat. I better quit that job and go to something to stay home.
Well, if you still had a vice, the material, could you think you could still tie flies?
It would take a little while to get back to used to
Yeah.
doing it, but yeah, it was, well, Red worked there, Red, and then John Bailey, and
Red nautical.
Red Bonico,
Okay.
and his wife worked there, and my sister worked there, and then she was the one that was shipping flies overseas. They would order out of the catalog for Dan Bailey, and she'd box up flies and send overseas. My sister worked there too, at Dan Bailey's, but I tied flies.
Did you have a favorite fly you liked to tie?
I think, no, not really. I mean, I liked the ones where you had to use the feathers from a pheasant. You have certain animals that you could get a feather from. And so, no, I don't think yeah, I think I could.
If she thinks she could do it, she.
Well, I had a conversation last year with Anna Patterson, and she grew up in Germany, and she was in Eastern Germany, and then after the war, the Russians came in. So her father said, we're going up to Austria because the U.S. is in charge of Austria. So she's in Austria, she's working over there, she meets a soldier, and they get hitched up, and they move to Montana. And it's sort of a story. Her boys were in the Pinewood Derby, and it was supposed to be a father-son event, but her husband was on the railroad. And so she had to whittle the cards. So one of the men, the fathers, said, "You're so good with your hands, Anna. Why don't you try out to apply for that fly tying position at Dan Bailey's?" Well, Red Monocle's wife
Yeah.
hired her on the spot. She had to pass the dexterity test at the job service. And she was talking about in 1991, Sandra Day O'Connor comes into the fly shop and she picks out Anna and said, I'm going up on the boulder tomorrow. What kind of fly would I go with? She said, I'd go with a royal wolf. And so it was written up in the Gazette, and it's gone around the world. And there's going to be a book about lady fly tyers and prominent women in America, and another book on immigrants in America and the people who made it. She's going to be in that chapter, a chapter on that too. So, do you have any pictures of you tying flies at Dan Bailey?
No.
You know? You've got pictures of everything else.
She was working.
Well, yeah,
Well, no, but-
they took pictures of us and stuff there when Dan Bailey's.
About what year were you at Dan Bailey's?
Well,
The year that Kennedy was,
63. Okay, so say 63, 64,
just not even a year.
not even a year. Then you just
She
realize
needed to be outside.
you need
but
to
that's
pass
one
it.
person that was in there. She was from, where was yoga? Let's see. Oh, she was from Germany.
Keto.
Yeah, Yoli?
Yola Keto would tied with me
Okay.
there.
The other thing she's so good at with her hands is she plays the piano. She plays, like, can play the guitar and a lot of instruments. And in the evening, as a matter of fact, this one night last week, she said she was sitting here playing the piano. But they'd sit here in front of the stove in the evening and not have the TV on. But Dad would say, why don't you play a few songs or hymns or such? And then she would do that. So maybe that's where some of the dexterity, you know, if that's what's involved with the fly tying.
Oh, well, and then I bowled too. I was in a bowling team with different ones there. We went to Great Falls once for a bowling tournament. And we went to Butte once for a bowling tournament too. I think I got a trophy.
What was your average?
Sometimes I got a trophy, but
What was your average, Lorraine?
well, it wasn't top, I'll tell you.
Well, I know.
Well, I guess normal.
Normal.
Yeah,
Okay.
normal. Yeah, but we enjoyed those tournaments. So
And then church and Bible
Oh, yeah.
studies and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that was a big
Yeah.
part of their lives too.
oh yeah, absolutely.
That's where we just came from this morning was Shields River
ladies.
Bible study, and we've been meeting for 14 years on Wednesday mornings.
Yeah.
Well, this is Jay Kiefer for the Yellowstone Gateway Museum, and you've been watching Tell Me a Story with Lorraine Bohleen and Willis Olmsted. It was so nice to have you invite us
We
up
appreciate
here.
it.
Thanks again.
We appreciated it. I enjoyed it. Yes.
We love talking about old stuff.
Yeah.